Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Black Literature, Black History. This is Jason Williams. Tonight, we're going to continue to talk about power, discourse, and how literature is actually used to establish discourse and establish power. I was looking at some videos and doing some research about post-colonialism, and post-colonial literary theory and post-colonial writings is a very good criticism to learn about because it challenges what happened during colonialism. And as Black people, we can understand and we should understand what happens during colonialism and how a power actually establishes itself as a dominant power and how they use literature to maintain their power. Now, as we stated before, power is knowledge. Those who are empowered create the knowledge. And everything is discourse. Therefore, the power generates the discourse, ratifies the discourse, and ultimately that discourse is accepted as truth in whatever society that you live in. So when we're reading these books and when we're criticizing these books and giving our criticism, we need to keep in mind discourse. Think about where is this writing coming from again, what is the message, and who is it being distributed against, who is it being distributed to, and that will help you understand what it is that you're looking at. And in New Historicism, everything, all text is literature. Like there's no difference, So again, like I said, who is empowered generates the discourse, circulates the discourse, ratifies the discourse, and ultimately that discourse is accepted as true. Now, literature and how it is used to dominate a society. Okay, when they come in and colonize, and this when white people come into a country and colonize the country, or when they're just dominating a culture, when they come in with their armies and they conquer, that's how you get in and you conquer. But literature is that's the key to establishing your power. Literature is the key to establish your power. Look at what they did with the slaves. And this also is what happened in India. But look at what they did with the slaves. They took their language away from them and then gave them their language, gave them their stories and their society to establish dominance. Now, what does literature do? Okay, so you become colonized or you're dominated by another power. Then this power takes their literature, takes their stories, takes their art, takes their culture, and gives it to you. So then you gather an appreciation for their society. When you read literature, you have the protagonist and the antagonist. Their protagonists become your protagonists. Their antagonists become your antagonists. They're good guys, their ideals, their morals, which may be different from your original morals, but their morals become the accepted morals. And then by establishing that, once that is established, it's easy for them to rule because you agree with what they're doing. You agree with their rules and their regulations, and it's their discourse is accepted as the truth. And this is what post-colonialism, post-colonial theory and books that are written that are defined as post-colonial writings, they challenge this. And one of the books that we're going to be reading later on, when we do go outside of America, is the book called Things Fall Apart. And I believe I can't pronounce the author's name, but he's a Nigerian author. But we're going to read that book, and we're going to discuss what happened in that book, how their culture fell apart, was dominated by European culture, and then we're going to bring that back and show how that relates to us here in America as Black Americans. But when we're reading these books, I always think about discourse. Who's writing this? What is the message being conveyed? And who is the targeted audience? What purpose is this being written for? And again, everything is discourse. Think about it like this, and how we said that the discourse of the U.S. is racism. Look at it, because we had slavery. Then after slavery, we had the Civil War, which supposedly freed the slaves, but the 13th Amendment continued with slavery. But we had the slavery, then we had Reconstruction. And during Reconstruction, the slaves were put in jail to continue to be slaves. Then after Reconstruction, we had Jim Crow. And then during and after Jim Crow, we had segregation. And then after that, we had the civil rights movement and all of that stuff. And then we got the new Jim Crow. That's the discourse of America. The discourse of America has always been the oppression of minorities, specifically Black people, because we were brought over here. We weren't here when we weren't established in America and conquered. We were brought over here as slaves en masse to create a population. And currently we're only 13% of the population. I believe that we're probably a little bit more. However, we're considered 13% of the population. So we are not controlling the narrative in the U.S. We are not controlling the discourse. So we need to continue to challenge that discourse. And like I said, we're 13% of the population. We may be more. And that's going to be like a segue into the next story that I'm going to get into in the ways of white folks, called passing, where a young man is passing for white. So, and he has to separate himself from his family, and he essentially becomes white. And that happens in the U.S. But currently, we're 13% of the population. We're not controlling the discourse. We're not controlling what is power. However, with this knowledge, we can now use what we know about discourse and about what's going on to look at the game and continue to challenge the discourse in America. Once we understand what's going on, and it's very hard to do that because you do have these feelings in you from the way that you were raised, and the discourse is very strong between what's right, what's wrong, what's accepted, and what's not accepted. When I read Things Fall Apart, I didn't agree with the African culture and what they were trying, what the man in the book was trying to accomplish. I didn't agree with it. However, that was his culture, and he couldn't pursue it. And there are cultures that survive thousands and thousands of years. So how can we say that it's what's right and what's wrong? Our discourse is ratified and accepted as truth, what's right and what's wrong. So when you're challenging this discourse, sometimes it's hard. So what you have to do as an academic and part of this class, and things that I've had to do, is sometimes it's very hard to accept something that is true, because it changes your whole perspective of reality. For example, a Black like me, The John Griffith that did Black Like Me was a white man who became black. You know, he painted himself a little bit, he tanned himself, he took medications and stuff to appear black. He shaved off his hair. He didn't change anything about his life except he lived as a black man for a while. And this experiment was recreated again in the 2000s. I'm not really sure, but a guy did it for about 2 weeks. He was white and he became black for about 2 weeks to see. And you know, they do this to challenge what black people are complaining about and what we quote, they say we whine about, but what we protest and what we experience. And both of these men, after their experiment, they had to seek psychiatric help because their whole reality as black men, their whole reality as white men, actually, after they became black men, was just altered. Everything that they believed in was just altered, and they had to seek psychiatric help. Now, there was an experiment where a black man lived as a white man for a couple weeks. He didn't do it to the extent that they did as black men, but he didn't need any therapy or anything afterwards. It was just a confirmation. You know, just a confirmation of what black people experience. And so in this course, we're going to look at some things that may challenge your reality. So you just have to be open to that. There's something that I'm looking into right now that's kind of hard for me to accept, but I'm going to keep looking into it. And it's this concept that Africans sold slaves as, you know, in the slave trade. And I accepted that, you know, I know that happened, but I had some theories and stuff like that to try to help me justify it, you know, say, well, they didn't understand that the slavery was for life because the slavery that they had in Africa was different than the slavery and everything like that. But some things that I'm looking at and some research that I'm looking at right now is showing that it was big time. Those Africans selling slaves in commerce, it was big. It was big time. And I don't want my reality, I don't want to really accept it, but I'm going to continue to look into it. Now, that does not mean that I don't believe that the capturing and the pillaging and the destruction of these villages and stuff was going on, because that was going on. You know, I have documentation of that from the Europeans themselves who were involved in it, and religious figures who were fine with the economic sense of buying and selling slaves, but they could not bring themselves to accept the pillaging, the burning, and the capturing of slaves. So, you know, that was easy for me to accept, but the extent of what I'm reading about the Africans actually selling slaves in order to gain power, you know, we're going to look into that. And I know in many of my videos you keep hearing me say, you know, I revert to slavery, I revert to something about discourse and power, and then I revert to here. That's because it is all linked. It's all linked. Not much has really changed from the time of slavery to now. Not as much has changed in the whole scheme of things. So I'm going to continue to do that. But this is Black literature, Black history, you know, so keep in mind that everything is discourse. Power is knowledge. Not so much that knowledge is power, but power is knowledge. So keep that in mind when you're reading these stories. And continue to challenge that discourse and challenge that power. Again, this is Black literature, Black history. Thank you and have a nice evening.